So, welcome. What are we getting up to today? Today's agenda, technology leadership. And you may be asking yourself the question, will I be tested on this? Yes, you will be tested on this. There will be 2 exam questions based on what we learned today. Don't worry, I will literally tell you what those questions are, so you have plenty of time to prepare. So what are we going to do today? We're going to have, as I mentioned, 3 folks dial in and talk to us a little bit about being a leader inside the technology space. We will talk to a software engineering manager, a director of the Office of the CISO, and a chief information security officer. So we're looking at somebody who has like 10 years experience, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, right? And then we'll look at some actions that you can take now and some really exciting tools that Allison, who I'm going to introduce in a second, showed me a little bit earlier today. So, as I'm wont to do, I'm going to show you videos that I think are funny, that I think frame this discussion.
Hey, Bowers. This is Peterson, your new replacement.
My what? I'm getting replaced?
Yeah, they didn't tell you?
No.
Some new assignment. They're being all weird and hush-hush about it.
I don't want a new assignment. I tell Sergeant Metzler that every time. I'm good at this.
Good at what? Sitting on ass? No one ever comes in here.
Yeah, I know. It's perfect for me. No one bothers me. I can't screw up. If I can just stay in here another 8 years, I get my pension. I'm all set. Can you just get me out of this?
No way. Not this time. It's coming from high up.
I don't understand. Why me? Every time Metzler says lead, follow, or get out of the way, I get out of the way.
Yeah, when he says that, you're not supposed to choose get out of the way. It's supposed to embarrass you into leading or at least following.
That doesn't embarrass me.
Look, Joe, you don't have a choice. You're just going to have to follow. Like, follow me upstairs like now.
Right now? Shouldn't I train this guy?
I think he can figure out how to sit on his ass and watch TV all day. Let's go.
So that's from a movie called Idiocracy, which I learned earlier today. Allison doesn't even know Idiocracy.
Do any of you know Idiocracy?
Oh,
See?
It's
Not
I know
the
it.
only one.
I tell people that all the time, that no one understands that movie reference. But trust me, it's what's happening in the world today. So if you have an opportunity. On that note, I'm here to introduce my dear friend Allison, who we've known each other, my gosh, now since 1998.
Is that right?
And multiple companies. Allison is the director of the Google School for Leaders. So I'll have Allison introduce herself, let you know a little bit about her and what that is. Allison?
Okay. It's lovely to be here. I'm Allison. You can probably tell from my accent, I grew up in England. I now live over here in California. And I head up the Google School for Leaders. And so what we essentially do is help train 30,000 managers and leaders at Google around the world. So when you think about people who are at Google who are managed, or some of the leaders that you'll read about in newspapers or see on the television, essentially it's my team that has the privilege of helping train them to be better leaders and managers in service of all of the people that work at Google and in service of all of our users. I've been at Google for about 18 years, which is a really long time, but it seems like yesterday. And my experience before Google was I had my company right before Google, again, around learning and development. And then prior to that, which is where I met you, I worked in financial services at JP Morgan and Citigroup. So I'm excited to be here and answer any questions that you might have.
Great. So yeah, Allison's. Oh, thank you. Go ahead. Give her a round of applause. Cool. So with that, what are we talking about today? We are talking about technology leaders. And so thank you for those who took the time here, 23 of you. A couple more, if you could, reminder, the attendance poll. This is how I'm going to gauge if you get the 20 points or not. So let's look at the first question here. Ask you, what are some words or phrases that describe a leader? Interesting. Look at this. Confident.
Yeah, I love
it. To be the biggest one here.
Okay.
Leader. Okay.
Yeah.
What else do you see?
Oh, I thought this, when I first read it, I thought that said change, which I would actually say is a really important word when it comes to leadership. Like, how do you think about leading in times of change, and how do you think about engaging people in times of change? Except it says charge. So I just reinterpreted that one. Open-minded, though. I love that. So this is going to come on to one of the quotes I think you're going to hear around the importance of engaging with others in an open-minded way, so that you can hear whether their perspective is better, worse, or indifferent to yours, and what that means.
I'll disagree with spit.
Spit? Did somebody say spit?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Maybe we don't understand the word.
Yeah, well, let's refine it a little bit. What about a leader in technology? Is there something different about being someone who leads a platoon into battle versus someone who's going to lead, a whole bunch of developers or a cybersecurity team? So, I see a lot of things. Of course, leader shows up, innovative, right? Technology. I think that's definitely a differentiator for leaders. Like, I wouldn't want to follow a general into battle if they've never been in the military before. I wouldn't want to follow a cybersecurity leader if, they never worked in a data center. Yeah.
The one that this one, ethicals are really, it's always been important, right? But there's something that's coming up right now when we work with leaders internally, where this notion of ethical leadership and ethical responsibility in terms of the product that we're building, and how do we think about that ethical perspective coming out into the world. So it's a hard thing to teach, it turns out, but
and I mean, in ethics, in terms of AI, is just off the charts. When I do risk management now, we used to always look at just impact and likelihood of an event occurring. And so we would say, what's the impact of a meteorite hitting the planet, right? It's catastrophic, but what's the likelihood, right? So when we build a data center, do I have to make it meteor proof? No. But what are the chances of somebody, potentially driving a car into it? Probably quite possible. So maybe we need to put some controls in place. We need to put a perimeter around our data center so cars can't get in, right? So with AI, though, we have to think about the social impacts. What does it? I mentioned to y'all once before. Let's say you're tasked with building the next MRI machine or the next X-ray machine, right? You're writing the code for that, and you jack up the code. You could kill someone, right? What does it mean now when you're using generative AI and it generates the code? Who's responsible that X-ray machine or MRI machine went south, right? So these are very, very hard and complex questions. So I do appreciate seeing that ethical there. How does that factor in? And I do see my friend Kobe joined. I'm going to bring him on stage in 1 minute. But why is Kobe here? Why is MK here? I reached out to some leaders that I respect, people that I've worked with directly, and I asked them this question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received or given that would help people starting out in their career in cybersecurity and comp sci to help them lead in the future? And my boss, Phil Venables, well, I guess technically my boss's boss, Phil is a very well-renowned computer scientist. He's on the President's Council for Advisors. He advises the president, and he works at Google, and he gives advice on everything from cybersecurity. In my conversation with Phil, his big takeaway was, in order to be an effective leader, you have to put yourself in that person's shoes. You have to understand what it's like to work in a data center. What is it like to solve a breach? What is it like to write 20,000 lines of code and then have to write 100,000 lines of unit tests, right? So I think that was very good, sage advice from Phil. Yeah, and so with that, actually, I'm going to turn it over to Kobe. I had the privilege of working with Kobe earlier this year for, on and off for, I'd say 6 to 8 months. Kobe is a software engineering manager. His team helped develop a system that my team uses, and hopefully, Kobe, when I get back in the office in January, we up the federation and the use of it in cloud. But Kobe, yep. Floor is yours. Would you like to introduce yourself to the class?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is indeed Kobe. I am a software engineering manager at Google, been there for about 12 years. I am what I like to call a house cat at Google. I have only been an engineer at Google, so I have not had a lot of time outside of it, but I can definitely speak broadly to how you lead anywhere in the tech industry, because a lot of the problems that exist at Google, they exist everywhere, and leadership is one of those things that it spans domains as well as industries, and happy to talk about it. I tend to specialize more in domain-driven engineering. What this means is I build software that scales a particular pre-existing thing. So for example, no one gets to tell an attorney how to be an attorney, right? But what we can do is scale how legal analysis happens, to whatever degree we need to internationally. So it's a very specific type of software engineering. Over the past few years, I've been focusing on teams that deliver legal risk management. This is the case where Dan and I know each other. Hi, Dan. It's still there, Dan. It's running. Yep, we're still here. No outages. We're good. And also regulatory infrastructure as well.
Cool. And so, Kobe, how many people are on your team right now?
Oh, it's varying a lot because I'm hiring right now. Hold on. It looks like I've currently got 18. I think I'll probably be +3 if I get it looks like I'll be +3 here in a few weeks. So I don't know, 18 to 23. It varies at the moment.
And on your team, do you have any level of individuals who are coming out of university, maybe 0 to 1 year of experience?
I do. I just had a new hire start a few months ago, and she is fresh out of university. I have 2 offer letters out to 2 other candidates that are fresh out of university, and I would say my team skews fairly far in the direction of like 0 to 5 years, that range. I'd say I'm about at least 75% 0 to 5 years at the moment.
Cool. And so, again, the general question I asked you, because I think if you heard what I said, what Phil had mentioned to me, almost, and it's a little comical, the Idiocracy video I played at the beginning, but sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, right? In order to be a good leader, sometimes you just have to follow, right? And Allison and I were talking on the way over. I currently roll up to some individuals who they haven't been in the industry as long as I have, but I understand and respect what they're doing, right? So, I mean, from that perspective, the individuals here, what sort of advice would you give them to say, hey, we know you got to take the comp sci courses. We know you have to get the internships. But what is some of that, intangible skill set related to leadership that they should think about honing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, not to speak too specifically to the movie Idiocracy, haven't seen that one in a while, but I laughed when I came in and saw you were talking about it. Some good advice that I got that I think applies here that I would give to anyone who's just emerging into the industry would be develop an attitude and a sense for where the gaps are at, no matter where they are at in your organization, and feel empowered to step into those gaps. So you bring up, for example, that you're not always leading, sometimes you're following, and leadership is knowing when to follow. Yes, that's absolutely right. And I think that can be kind of difficult for folks who are just entering the industry to learn what that looks like. What I often hear from my new hires that are just out of university going, how do I lead? Where do I get involved? How do I start? And what I tell them is there's never a lack of opportunities to start. You just don't have to start big. We bias a lot when we talk about leadership is what you'll look like as a leader when you've been in the industry 10 years. Managing a really big team, owning a really large product, or having major impact on the bottom line of your company. But in reality, you don't start there. You start learning how to identify what does your team need? What does your neighbor need? What are the things that just aren't getting done and need to get done, but maybe just no one has time, or maybe no one's thought of it yet. And they don't have to be really big, world-shaking, product leadership perspectives. They can be as simple as, this system is not stable enough. I'm going to spend a little bit of time building some unit tests. Or I'm noticing we don't have any service level objective tracking, and I can step in and help make it easier so we know when our users are not experiencing the services we need. Or where are there people on my team that could use my expertise on something? I don't have the authority to lead, but I do understand how to solve their problems, and I can help. And I think that that's a really valuable way to look at how you'll start your career as a leader, because before you know it, small gaps become big gaps. as far as you'll notice bigger gaps out there. People will invite you to fill gaps. If you have that attitude and that mindset for not waiting to be in a position to tell people what to do or to have, formal authority, but instead be proactive and find ways that you can help your team, your organization, your product just from what you have right in front of you, that's the start of leadership.
Cool. Well, Kobe, I know you said you had a hard stop, so I do appreciate your time here. Everyone, if you give Kobe a round of applause, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, groovy. I do see some of our other guests have joined. My friend MK, looks like he's on the line. MK is a director in the office of the CISO for Google Cloud. I've worked with MK on and off for the last 3 years since I joined Google, working on a lot of some training space. How did we train our individuals up, utilizing some of the training that MK and his team have put together. Talking to Alice at MK, actually, we're trying to get access for the students here to get credits to use Grow with Google and maybe take some of those courses, get certifications. But welcome, MK. I'm hoping you could introduce yourself to the course, let them know a little bit about MK.
Hey, Dan, thanks for inviting me to this session, and hello to the students in the room. As Dan indicated, my name is MK Palmore. I'm a director in Google Cloud's office of the CISO. Been at Google now for about 3.5 years. Just as a little bit of background, before Google, I worked for a company called Palo Alto Networks as a VP for the Americas in a very similar role as a field CSO. Prior to coming into the private sector, I spent a career in the U.S. government. I'm a United States Marine, so I'm a veteran, graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and I spent a career, 22 years, in the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a special agent. I had the opportunity towards the end of my career in the FBI to actually lead one of the largest cybersecurity investigative teams that the Bureau has, and I subsequently matriculated, as I indicated, into the private sector. So have spent the better part, or should I say the second half of my professional career in the technology space. It's wonderful to see this room full of folks eager to figure out whether or not you can make careers and a stand in the cybersecurity and or technology space. I'm here to tell you that you absolutely can, and happy to open up the discussion to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think have been important tidbits that I've picked up along the way that have certainly been helpful to me in terms of being able to create a thriving career. And essentially what it means really to be an executive in the technology space at the moment. So looking forward to discussing that with you guys with the limited time that we have.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for MK? Perhaps how to get started in the career, what it means to work for the FBI? Yes.
How was it transitioning from the FBI to the private sector in technology, especially working in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so MK, the question is, how was it transferring from the public sector into the private sector, specifically in the domain of cybersecurity?
Yeah, so a great question. Let me answer that this way. First of all, for those of you trying to figure out your pathways right now, you're thinking, when I graduate from school, if this is the career set that I want to bring into, how do I even begin that journey? Let me be clear and highly, highly recommend to you, those of you in the room, please look at the U.S. public sector as a place to start your cybersecurity careers. There is no better jump off point to get into global commercial cybersecurity than the U.S. public sector. And certainly, I mean, if you can get a job with any of the intelligence agencies, anything at the federal level in the cybersecurity lanes, even if you don't stay there for a full career, the exposure, practical experience that you get in the cybersecurity realm, especially as it relates to national security matters, is all marketable and transferable into the commercial space for cybersecurity. I can't tell you the number of folks who I come across, like myself, veteran backgrounds, public sector backgrounds. We are highly sought after in the space because of the practical experience that we bring and the exposure to national security. So let me put that tidbit out to you. For those of you trying to figure this out, the public sector is absolutely a viable pathway to you. And we are long away from the days where you need to consider a lifetime in the public sector, like what I did and like what Steve, my colleague, who's going to follow me, is going to talk to you about. You don't have to think about it in, oh my God, I got to spend an entire career here. So if you ever want to talk about that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. In terms of the transfer, personally, I found it to be very easy. Everyone does not necessarily necessarily experienced that. I spent 32 years in the U.S. federal government, so I was absolutely ready at that time to transfer and had been positioning myself through very clear objectives that I set for myself over time around how to prep for my eventual transition into the private sector. But I found that the skills that I developed in the leadership realm, ability to communicate technical issues in audiences across the board, all of that stuff was transferable for me, and I was very easily able to apply the things that I had learned and experienced in the federal government to what I'm experiencing in the private sector. I've been what most would consider to be highly successful in the private sector, so the transition was good, but I definitely relied heavily on my experience in government to be able to be successful.
MK, I often get questions from the students, and it's interesting to me. They say, hey, you know, I'm cybersecurity, or I'm computer science, or I'm software engineering. You know, in terms of that transition from your perspective, how easy is it transitioning from one domain to the other? And is it valuable to do that transition as well as the transition from public sector to private sector, like you mentioned?
Yeah, so I mean, I oftentimes tell people cybersecurity as a field is as wide and as deep as anything that I've ever seen. But the usual advice I give to folks is to sort of pick your domain, pick your poison, right? Pick an area within cybersecurity that you want to develop some relative expertise on, and make that be the area where you do the deep dives and develop the expertise in the room. But here's one thing I'll caution to you. So I come from a logistics background in the military, and logistics officers are sort of masters of no domains, but experience in several different domains. That's kind of how I look at cybersecurity. I wouldn't consider myself a deep technical expert across any particular vertical within cybersecurity, but I do have knowledge and can go across the domains and verticals and go as deep as I need to go in order to be able to get to that next meeting, get to that next opportunity. I bring in the deep technical experts like Dan and others when I'm ready to then hand off to have deeper conversations with customers or folks that we're engaged with. So my feedback to you on that is the transition is fine, but make sure that there is at least either an area that you are a relative domain expert, or that you have experience across the spectrum, because you will find that all of the knowledge that you gain across the way will absolutely be useful to you. You will be able to translate your experience from one domain to the next, and depending on what the customer involvement is or what it is that you're engaged in. Just be ready if you need to hand off to someone with deeper expertise, and never be afraid to know, like, you know, don't get yourself out over your skis. Never be afraid to know that you've sort of reached the limit of your technical expertise, where you want to bring in someone else who maybe has a deeper understanding of, because what you want to be able to do is meet whoever it is that you're dealing with wherever they are, and answer the mail on whatever use case it is that they're presenting to you. That's how you begin to build trust with them, and you get to that next meeting, next opportunity.
And that's nice. I think closing on what Kobe had said there, but sometimes we lead, sometimes we follow, and sometimes you're deferring to that expert in that domain. So I think that's a great bit of advice on this topic we're looking at. MK, thank you for your time today. I do appreciate it. Everybody give it up for MK.
Hey, folks, don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn. I hope that you guys have all established your LinkedIn profiles. It's one of the most persuasive ways to get your brand and yourself out in the industry. So please don't hesitate to connect with me. And if there are questions and things that you want to follow up on, I'm open to it. So good luck.
Thank you, MK. Okay, next up, my friend, Major General Stephen Hager. Steve, I had to ask some of my friends I knew from my military days what was the correct way to introduce you, because I said, you know, I know him as Steve, but I want to provide the respect that's accorded to you for being a Major General. So thank you for that. Steve is currently the Director of Strategy and Artificial Intelligence for the Google Public Sector, and we heard a little bit about that. Steve, Major General Stephen, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself to the course here?
Sure. Thanks. Hey, first thing I got to say is when I joined Google 2 years ago, MK was my onboarding mentor, and today he still is one of my mentors and good friends at Google. So, you know, his advice is probably a lot better than mine. But I'll give you a bit of a background on myself. So 35 years between the Army Reserve and active duty. So I want to make sure I wasn't just an active duty guy. And I actually am born and raised in Silicon Valley. So a lot of the tech stuff I learned were at startup companies that I did in the Valley. So my last 5 years on active duty, I worked at the National Security Agency and United States Cyber Command. And I was the deputy commander for a group called the Cyber National Mission Force. And our unclassified mission was to help defend our nation's critical infrastructure. So the way the military works, we do not do things domestically in the U.S. because of a rule called Posse Comitatus, but we try to go as close to the adversary as possible, and we try to disrupt their capabilities. So in the U.S., from a physical perspective, it's very great that we have two oceans to our east and west, and north and south of us, we generally have, partners that aren't too aggressive to us. So in the cyber domain, those oceans and borders don't really matter as much because it only takes a few milliseconds from an adversary to get into our critical infrastructure, right? So the traditional military paradigms don't always fit that we use in the land domain, the sea domain, the air domain. They're a little different in the cyber domain. So the three unclassified things that we did at the Cyber National Mission Force that I could talk about were learn everything about the adversary, i.e. intelligence, use what we learned about the adversary to enable defense, right? So if I learn something about the bad guy, I use that to enable defense. And then number three, when directed, we impose costs on our adversary. So when I was coming to retire, I wanted to obviously be back in Silicon Valley with my family because I love the tech sector. And I looked for how I could continue that mission. So if you think about our nation's critical infrastructure, the vast majority is owned and operated by the private sector. And more importantly, from a cybersecurity perspective, they're defended by the private sector. The government doesn't get on these networks and do these things. So I looked for a company that had scale, and I looked for a technology that companies were moving to. And so I wanted to go to a cloud service provider. And I also looked for a company that had innovative ways. And the three things I want to talk about that led me to come to Google are really things, what I would say, people, process, and technology. So I'm an Army guy. I'm not very complicated. We have this thing called the rules of three. So I'm going to talk about three things: people, process, and technology. So I told you I was born in Silicon Valley. So I was lucky to see how my small little farming community became this world-class tech center. And I went to Santa Clara University, and I was very lucky because we had a number of guest speakers through my college years come talk to us. And one of the most important guest speakers was a gentleman by the name of Gordon Moore. Gordon Moore was the founder of Intel and at one point was the CEO of Intel. Intel is a chip company and they're located in Santa Clara, so they're just down the road from the university. And one of the things Gordon Moore is known for is this thing called Moore's Law. And Moore's Law was that the number of transistors, he initially said in 1965, the number of transistors will double every year. And then he changed that. And he said the number of transistors were double every 2 years. So my first active duty assignment in the late 80s, early 90s, I actually designed ASICs for the national security agencies. ASICs are application-specific integrated circuits, right? So I was a real geek, right? Designing the microchips and doing those things. Our motto at the time was we design ASICs that industry would not, could not, or should not build in order for us to do our national security mission. But that concept that hardware will improve and double every 2 years was one of my guiding principles. So I may not have enough compute, I may not have enough store, or it may be too expensive. But in 2 years, that may be possible. So I want you to think about how what's not possible today could be possible in just 2 years. Now, if you Google that today, you'll see that Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, he'll say that Moore's Law is dead because of the physical limitations that we've now reached in designing ASICs. But the concept still remains that what's not viable today because of cost and compute and store could be viable in just a few years. Okay, so that was the technology. Process. Again, I know I got gray hair and I'm an old guy. I'm going to talk a little bit about something historical. In the early 1940s, there's a gentleman, my Dr. Thomas J. Watson. He was a founder of a company called IBM. And so because of the processes, they did market research on who would want to use the initial mainframe computers that IBM had built in the early 1940s. And they really needed to understand who had deep pockets and who needed to use compute, extensive compute. And their market research led to this quote from Dr. Watson. I think the world market is about 5 for the computers. He thinks he can only sell 5 computers in the whole world because of the processes that they had at the time, because nobody had ever thought about how to use computers. So my comment on process to you is understand the processes that you're working under. And if they don't make sense, don't be afraid to challenge it, right? So just think about those processes. Okay, people, process, technology. So I'm an Army guy. The most important thing to me is people. And as a career Army officer, I often tell people, hey, I'm a tech guy from Silicon Valley that chose the Army because people are the most important thing to me. And if you look at the Army budget, you will see that the largest line item in the Army budget is for personnel. You look at the other 2 services, the Air Force, the Navy, great services, but their largest line items are for technological things, an aircraft carrier, an F-35 strike fighter, one of those things. So the Army takes human capital and sprinkles technology at them, like a Kevlar helmet, night vision goggles, a GPS, an M4, and we make them warriors. The other 2 services take a big technological platform, like an aircraft carrier or a strike fighter, and they sprinkle human capital at them to make them warfighters. I'm not telling you which service is better than the other, but understand the importance of people. Because when we think about Google, we are maniacal about what Google develops for our customers. We have a thing called a customer user journey. We want to focus on the things that can make them more productive. And in the world of cybersecurity, we want to focus on what makes them more secure, what makes them more safer, and how we can gain their trust to use our systems. It's all about the end user. And the last thing I want to say is finally to talk to you about you. You need to understand why you do things. So in the military, one of the things we learned is that we never tell the soldiers how to do things. We explain the why. Then we give them the end state or the objective. Alpha Company, clear the airfield by 0630, because by 0800, the 4 elements of our logistics train are going to set up a ROM, a refuel on the move, to be viable by 1100 to support our advancing heavy armor units by 1200 so they can meet their objectives of securing the southern borders. We don't tell them how to do things. We leave it up to them because they're humans, but we give them the why and the outcome. Likewise, why do you want to do your job? Why did you choose cybersecurity? Why did you choose computer science? Why do you want to be a manager? And it's generally a lot more than, oh, I want good pay or I want to get a promotion or a title. It's something that's innate, that's built into you. You need to figure out what that why is, and you should be, passionate about why you want to do those things. Okay,
Steve,
we talk about this technology and understand that the things that are impossible today will be possible tomorrow. Don't be afraid to challenge the processes that are given to you, and most importantly, it's people. Understand the why. So I leave you with this one quote from a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek. And his quote is, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Thank you.
There is so much I want to take from that, Steve, that we've talked about in class. And I've used this metaphor at the class. A lot of individuals here came in not knowing any computer science. And I said, look, we're going to learn letters, then we're going to learn words, then we're going to learn sentences and paragraphs and books, right? And then you're going to write your own novel. And so we're finally at that point where we're writing our own novel. And I've been trying to say to the class, look, why are we writing our own novels? And to be fair, and I appreciate a lot of the answers, money. I want that career for money. And I said, listen, you have to find your real why. Because once you get that number, guess what? You want the next number. And guess what? You want the next number. So what is your why? Why are you passionate about this? So very, very good lessons here. Are there any questions from the audience here that we can field in a minute or two? What's that?
You did a great job.
Yeah.
That was a good initiative.
Oh, that was a positive accolade in terms of the quality of what you had shared. I have a question.
Please.
Major General Stephen.
Steve, call me Steve. Call me Steve. Sorry.
Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Allison. I sit in the Google School for Leaders. And so one of the things that we talk about at the in the Google School for Leaders is the importance of self-awareness. And it's actually one of the things that I want to talk a little bit more about today. And so I appreciate that you bring that up. Do you have any specific practices that you use to help in terms of raising or monitoring how you're operating at any point in time that could be valuable to share?
Yeah, so talking to peers is very, very important. So I talked to MK a bit, right? And part of it, you know, he discussed a bit about working in the government and coming to the private sector. And I'll tell you, a lot of that is what I call translation, right? So whether it's military lingo or law enforcement, you know, the way we talk and the way our cultures are, coming to the tech sector is a little bit different. And so we have to translate how Google, the private sector, does that. So a lot of that is those things. So talking with people on both sides, on the tech side, and then the folks that you're more familiar with. And then the other thing I'll say is, you know, I've been married for probably like 25 years. I spend a lot of time talking to my wife. Now, I don't tell her like classified stuff, but I discuss some of the things and she does with her work. Some of the things, you know, with some abstractions, right? Not too much detail. And so she's like my very good sounding board, and she constantly puts me in my place. You know, I got promoted to Major General, and she said, "That's great. You're still going to do the dishes and throw the garbage out." And so, you know, part of that is making sure you have somebody who's grounding you, who knows you well enough, right? And I think that is part of the self-awareness to do that. So.
Yeah, I've expressed to the class, I had mentioned my mentor, Jeff. You know, I have a friend, I've been friends with Jeff. Jeff is 65. He and I have traveled to over 132 countries together. Last one, we were in Afghanistan in March, believe it or not. But I said, find a mentor, find someone that you can be that sounding board, not just your cheerleader. You need the cheerleader, but you need someone to tell you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear. So I think it's great to have that. So, yeah. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time, and I will be back, butt in seat come January, doing risk assessments again.
All right, thanks. Have a great day, everybody.
All right, thanks, Steve. Okay, wow. Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't know. Take a minute to reflect on the individuals that you spoke to. I mean, you understand what a major general is? There's only 4-star generals. That's as high as it goes. He's 3 stars. He got pretty much as far as you can get in that career. That is the picture of a leader. We might not all be inclined towards the military, but you can see there is a transition there. Those skills are applicable in this space. Allison, any big takeaways from that before we move on to our next section?
No, it's funny. Has anybody heard of Simon Sinek that he quoted? So his TED video is one of the most watched TED videos that's out there. And this idea of start with why is just a very ubiquitous concept that lots of people talk about. And as he said, it's one of the really important grounding concepts that you can use individually, but you can also use anytime that you're with a group, anytime you're in a team. It's like, why are we here? Why do we want to win this thing? What is it that's important to us about it? So if you haven't watched it, it's quite a good watch.
And can we be real about something? Because I get this all the time when I'm in office hours and stuff. If you do something that you love, this isn't just hyperbole. The money will follow.
Oh yeah, I can give you my own personal story on that one. So I went to university in England. I did a management science degree from the University of Manchester. Do we have any Manchester United fans? Manchester City? Yeah. Okay. So my university was a couple of miles down the road from them, and I wanted the most high-paying job I could get out of university, because I thought that I deserved the most paying high job out of university. And I went through a ton of different interviews. I got offered 3 or 4 different jobs. And I went with the one that was going to pay me the highest. And I was pleased that I did. It was JP Morgan. And it was an amazing training program that I joined. But I got there, and after about 9 months, I was like, I don't get why this was important to me. I don't get why, like, I'm working to make somebody more money. And I thought I wanted it because of the money. And it was only when I began to realize that what the company was actually doing was equally, if not more important to me than the salary that I was going to get from it, that I began to start to think about, well, what else do I have to do? That was kind of when I started to chart my own path with my own company, because I thought, well, at least I can craft it into something that matters to me. But it was only when I joined Google that I really began to see that that became more possible. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been at Google for 18 years, because it no longer became about the salary. It actually became about the opportunities to do things like this, to spend time with all of you, and the opportunity to see something bigger and more impactful in the world than just some numbers on a piece of paper. But I had to figure that out, and I had to figure out why it was important.
So yeah, you know, start working on that why, figure it out. And I've said this to all of you, and I thank you all, right? It's taken me a long time to sort of find my why. And this is it.
Yeah. And I can tell. I've known him for a long time. And I can see the joy that he had when he came onto campus this morning, and the pride and the love that he has for all of you. And it's actually a joy to watch. It is. And you can see it, and you can totally see it in the person.
So, your turn.
Oh, all right. Okay. So this is where him and I are going to differ. So he started with this slide, and so he put foundational knowledge and hands-on technical skills as number 1 and 2. Now, technically, they're not in any order, but I would have started with number 3, which is learn about you. So that's what we're going to start with. And it links to everything that Stephen was just saying. So this first one around like self-awareness is so important, right? Who are you, and where do you get your energy? Right? Like, do you sit? I clearly not this class, because this class, I'm sure you sit and you're like, oh, this is the most exciting, interesting content, right? But when you're out and about and doing whatever it is that you enjoy doing outside, there's some stuff that you're going to do that gives you energy. You're like, I love doing this. I could do this all day. And then there's other stuff that's just going to feel hard and difficult, and like it's like there's difficult because again the why's there, but then there's difficult. It's like, no, I just really don't enjoy this. And so there's something when it comes to like self-awareness, which is what is it that's giving me energy? Like, where do I want to spend my time? Like, when you begin to think about the jobs that you want to do in the future, what are some of the companies where you're like, yeah, I could really see myself there. Like, that seems really interesting to me. That's the kind of work I would want to be doing. Or, oh, no, actually, that isn't anything that's interesting. So paying attention to that like level of energy, I think is really important. And there's also something in self-awareness around like what's important to you and what values do you hold. You can Google 1,000,001 personal values, like quiz type things. But those values are the things that actually are always going to be true, that are always going to ground you. And so they're going to show up in whatever job you do and whatever activity you engage in. And so again, you ideally want jobs and you want opportunities that are aligned with the values that you hold. And so again, becoming more aware of what that level of awareness is, like who are you, how do you want to be in the world, and what's important to you, is something that you can invest some time in. And it really helps as you begin to see all of these different opportunities to know which ones you want to invest in. Develop people skills. So you put down develop soft skills.
I told Allison, I said, you find me in my lecture saying, as the human does this, the interpreter does this, right?
Yeah, and so there's a ton of research, discussion out at the moment in terms of the fact you can't really call them soft skills anymore, because actually they're the most critical skills that exist. And then the critical skills of how do you work with other people. And my own little thing here is that you can it's around communication, it's around collaboration, all of those pieces. In my opinion, the number one thing here with people skills is listening. And Stephen actually talked about that. But it's, can you listen to the other person that you are in conversation with in a way that chooses to hear what they're saying? Not just can I be in a conversation so that we exist together, but can I actually try to begin to think about what it is that you're saying and where you're coming from? Because when I can do that, I can actually make more sense of what it is that we both want. But what we typically do in the world is we engage in conversation to be in the active conversation. We don't actually choose to listen to the other person. And
Wait to speak.
Wait, it is a way to speak. And it's, so let me just check that I heard what it was you said. Did you just say this thing? Because invariably, you ever have one of those conversations where you're like, oh, we're talking like this? Maybe you just say, so there's something there around listening. Mindset beats skill set. This one I would go on about curiosity. So Simon Sinek's also a big curiosity fan. But how can you be more curious? Like, how do you walk out of this lecture hall and go, oh, you know what? I wonder what, blah, blah, blah. Or I wonder, like, if you ask one wondering question, or I'm curious about blah, blah today. That curiosity can just be really interesting again in kind of opening your eyes about who you are, what's important to you, what you're paying attention to. And
Final points on this.
the final point is practice. So practice in terms of leadership roles, but practice with an intentionality of observation. Like when you have a conversation, like how did that conversation go? Did I actually hear what that person said? Was it effective? If it wasn't, then think about it, like reflect on it.
And so that's why I do appreciate when I do those polls and ask you what zone are we in, get some feedback. I try to listen to you and what you need in order to learn better. All right, so with that, some practical things. If you're interested, and I hope you would be interested in this, Allison turned me on to this morning. There's going to be a new a cool platform called the Career Dreamer. That QR code will link you out here to the Join the Waitlist. This is really neat. It's a tool where you're going to be able to go in, and I played with it a little bit this morning, and say, I'm getting a degree in computer science. What now? What are the career fields? And it uses AI to ask you a series of questions, to sort of make a suggestion to you. Hey, have you considered a career working in a data center? Have you considered big data and so forth? So waitlist for that. Do we have any rough timeline? Are we months, quarters?
No, I think we're weeks.
Weeks? Yeah. So that would be the first step to sort of help refine what you want to do with this degree that you're going to get here. The next practical thing, fingers crossed this is going to land. A lot of people have asked me about certifications. We think we're going to be able to get Google to allow folks specifically in this course to go to Grow with Google and get a whole bunch of different certifications, cybersecurity certificates, data analytics, big data, right? These are courses that are anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks online. You take them at your own pace, but you get an actual certification. The intent is you can actually walk into a job someplace with these. That is an excellent add-on to your resume, to what you're doing here, in addition to your degree. You can go out and say, look, I actually have also this other information that I didn't learn inside the classroom. So to close out, these are the future exam questions. What attributes can you identify in the leaders we heard from today that inspire you? So what did you take away from what Steve said, or MK, or Kobe, or even Allison, or myself, right? And then those 5 areas that we looked at here, what are you curious at exploring next? Are you looking for resources, this, Grow with Google that I just mentioned? Allison, spend a lot of time about learning about yourself, right? So what area might you find, is the best use of your time? So tangible stuff coming up. Right after this, Alice and I are heading over to 454 in Martin. If you want to hang out with us, we have a whole ton of Red Bull and snacks and stuff. Happy to have just some informal conversations with y'all. Next week, we'll get back onto classes, and in a little over a week, we have the exam. So thank you, Allison.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, yeah, sorry. Brought a whole bunch of Google swag here. If you'd like to grab, have at it. We've got some bags, a whole bunch of stuff.
Oh yeah, these are the small ones, I guess.
Probably like